name is Jane Portnoy, and I'm the author of a new cookbook, A Jewish Calendar of Festive Foods. There are many wonderful holiday recipes in this book that I think you'll enjoy. Today, I would like to demonstrate my version of Rugelach. Rugelach consists of a cream cheese and butter dough with a filling of chopped walnuts, golden raisins, cinnamon, and sugar. This recipe will make 6 dozen or 72 bite-sized, mouth-watering treats. In order to approach this recipe, I usually divide it into 4 parts. The first part is the shopping. Secondly is making the dough. Third would be making the filling and the topping. And finally, the fun part, rolling the dough, filling the rugelach, and baking them. So, one point I'd like to make about the first part, and that's the shopping. It's very important to shop ahead of time and have all your ingredients at hand in the house. It's a waste of time, it's tiring to have to run out to the store, and you never know when they'll be out of an ingredient. So shopping ahead of time is always a good thing. Secondly, making the dough. An important point about making the dough is having all our ingredients at room temperature. So I've got the cream cheese, sweet butter, and the egg at room temperature. Now, we're going to now make the dough, and you'll see that I have everything out in place. All my ingredients are measured out, and this is called a mise en place. In French, that means put in place. And you can be organized, you know that you have everything on hand, and then you can proceed to put your dough together. So the first thing I'd like to do is measure out my flour. Now, baking is an exact science, and I like to be precise when I measure my ingredients. So this recipe calls for 2 cups of sifted flour, 2 sticks of sweet butter, 8-ounce brick of cream cheese, and I use regular cream cheese, not low fat, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1 egg yolk for the dough. I will reserve the egg white for later when I actually glaze the rugelach. So, the flour first. The first thing I want to do is sift my flour before I measure it. So I'm going to put my flour into, you can use a sieve, or you can use a strainer, or you can use a sifter. So I'm just going to go ahead and sift up a bunch of flour. And then after I sift it, I will measure it. So I'll take my measuring cup, and then I'm going to level that off with the flat side of a knife. So we have exactly 1 cup of sifted flour, and put the flour into the mixing bowl. I'll put these aside for now. And I have the 2nd cup of sifted flour. And again, you're going to level this with the flat side of the knife. So you know you have exactly what you need. Okay, so I've got my flour. That's my dry ingredient. My other dry ingredient is salt. And I'll add that. Now, you're going to add your sweet butter. It's unsalted butter. It seems like a lot, but this is what gives the dough that wonderful flakiness. And the cream cheese. I'm going to take a pastry blender, and I need to blend the butter and the cream cheese in with the flour. And I like this bowl because it has a wide surface and it makes the blending a lot easier. What you're going for is to blend the butter and the cream cheese until it achieves the size of small peas. You don't want it too fine because you want to have some pieces of butter to maintain that flakiness. That's what's going to cause the flakiness in the recipe. You may have to clean off this pastry blender a couple of times. But you see that it's beginning to break into small pieces. So we'll keep doing this for a while. Again, having a flat, large surface like this makes the blending a lot easier. And these pastry blenders are very nice. In old recipes, they talk about using 2 knives to do this, but the pastry blender is a lot easier. I'm beginning to achieve what I want here. Okay. So now you may be wondering, how is all this going to come together in a dough? And we're going to add one more bit of moisture, and that's going to be an egg yolk. So I need to separate my egg. Okay, and I have the yolk. The egg white I'm going to reserve for later. I'm going to just beat up this egg yolk a little bit, just to break it up. And I want to now add this to my dough. And again, it doesn't seem like this will come together, but we'll see. I'm going to take a large fork and start gathering the dough. And the action of the fork and then later my hand is going to bring this all together, hopefully. You can see that it's beginning to clump together a little bit. It's still not where I want it. And just when you're sort of thinking this is never going to happen, that's about the time I take a perfectly clean hand and go ahead and dive right into it. There's a lot of moisture in the butter and the cream cheese, and that's also what's bringing it together, not just the egg yolk. And now I'm beginning to get my dough. You're able to knead this right in the bowl. Now you're seeing that the dough is coming together. You can use a little pastry scraper like this. And that's it. So now we have our beautiful dough. It's all gathered together, but it's not really able to be rolled out. It's much too soft. So we're going to divide this dough and we're going to chill it. I almost call it like a curing process. And once it's chilled, it's really easy to handle. If I tried to roll this out now, it would just be a big mess. So I'm going to take this and put it on a floured board and divide the dough. So you want a log of about 9 inches, and I'll go ahead and just use the measuring stick to see where I am here. And it's just about 9 inches. And what I'm going to do is divide this log into 6 portions. I divide it into 6 because I like tiny bite-sized rugelach. If you like larger pastries, you could actually divide the dough into 4 parts. But today we're going to divide it into 6. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide the dough in half. And if you don't want your knife to stick too much, you can flour the knife. And then each half would be divided into thirds. You can measure this or you can eyeball it. I'm going to go ahead and eyeball it. So here are my 6 portions of dough. And if you recall, I said at the beginning that we're going to have 6 dozen or 72 pastries at the end of this, so that each portion of dough is going to yield 12 pastries. So what I want to do now is take each portion, pat it into a disc. I'm going to take a piece of plastic wrap, put a little bit of flour on the bottom, take my disc, a little bit of flour on the top, wrap it, and that's going to go into the fridge. I'll do that again. I take my plastic wrap, here's my dough, pat it, and it really handles pretty well considering how much butter is in there. Wrap it. I'll do one more for you. And I usually try to leave the dough in overnight because that gives me the best results and I don't have a lot of grief when I try to roll it out. And once you've prepared your dough properly, rolling out dough is not difficult. A lot of people are afraid of doing it, but it's really easy if you properly chill your dough. So now we have our dough chilling in the fridge. And by the way, I'd like to make another point about the dough. It freezes extremely well because of the high butter content, and you can keep that dough in the freezer up to 3 months. Take it out and fill and bake your rugelach anytime you want to. So that's something to think about, to keep dough in the freezer. Now we're ready to do our filling and our topping. And I have our filling ingredients. We have 1 cup of walnuts, 1 cup of golden raisins, 1½ teaspoons of ground cinnamon, and 1 cup of granulated sugar. We also have our topping ingredients, a ½ cup of sugar, a ½ teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and that will be mixed together to make cinnamon sugar. And finally, our reserved egg white we're going to beat up and use as a glaze for the rugelach. So now on to chopping up our ingredients. So when we chop our ingredients for the filling, I would like to start by chopping up the raisins first. And the reason I do that is they take a lot more processing than the walnuts. So I'm going to add the raisins first, and I will add about half of the sugar, which will coat the raisins so they won't be too sticky. And this, you'll see, will take quite a bit of processing. If I added the walnuts in the beginning, it would become a paste and it would be very difficult to handle. So let's go ahead and process these golden raisins. They're still not quite there. Okay, so now I have my chopped raisins, and I can add the remainder of my ingredients. The walnuts, the ground cinnamon, and the remainder of the sugar. And I want to get a nice sort of powdery texture here. You can use a pulsing technique. Okay, and I think that's just what I want. You can take a bowl, and I'll show you what this looks like. Everything came together nicely, and I don't have a pasty consistency. You can see that my filling will be very easy to utilize. So that's the filling. And now for the topping, I simply need to add my cinnamon to the sugar, and I will mix that up. Make cinnamon sugar, which I'm going to put in my sugar shaker to use later on. And so we've completed the filling and topping ingredients. Now we have the final and most fun part of our recipe. We're going to roll out the dough, fill it, and make our rugelach. I'd like you to see that we have this dough that's been chilling for at least several hours or several days. I like to use a marble pastry slab, which keeps the dough cool and easy to work with. And I'm going to use a French rolling pin. This is a hard maple rolling pin that I've copied from a family heirloom, and actually had it made in Vermont out of hard maple. And it's available on my website, www.jewishfestivefoods.com. So I'm going to go ahead and flour the marble slab, and don't be afraid to use a little bit of flour because you don't want this to stick. And I'm going to flour the rolling pin. And you want to roll, and that's why, you should use flour, because you don't want it to stick and then get discouraged that you're not able to do it. Keep turning your dough and roll from the center outwards. We want to get a circle about 1/4 inch thick. Again, I'm not afraid to use flour if I need it. Keep turning and keep checking the dough. It does have a high fat content, so you do have to be a little bit careful. But notice that it's pretty good considering the high content of butter and cream cheese. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle. There are people that recommend actually cutting it into a perfect circle, but since we're home cooks, we don't have to do that. Maybe in a bakery they would. I like the French rolling pin because I can really feel contact with the dough. The other type of rolling pin with the handles, you don't really get the feedback that you do with a French roller. I have my circle. And it's in pretty good shape. I'm going to use about 3 tablespoons of our filling. And I'm just going to spread that filling over the dough. And then you can take either a knife or you could use a pizza cutter, and we're going to cut this dough into quarters. So 4 quadrants, and then each quadrant will be cut into 3 wedges. So that is going to give us our total of 12 pastries. And now, the moment of truth. Will our pastries stick to the surface or not? So now we're going to roll our rugelach. You want to roll from the wide end to the point. And you make this nice little rolled up pastry. I bend it into a crescent shape and I put it on my prep pan. And I'll explain to you in a few minutes why I use a prep pan. Again, I roll from the wide end. There I have my little roll. And you're definitely the master of this dough. It's not the master of you. So if you don't like the way it looks, just change it. Or if it's sticking to the surface, just take a knife and loosen it up. Now, even though some of these are smaller and some are larger, for some reason, when they cook for 18 minutes in the oven, they all come out the same. So don't be too worried if some are larger and some are smaller. Again, we're home cooks, and they don't have to be absolutely perfect, but they are going to be perfectly delicious. One of them jumped up just then. Probably could have used a little more flour, and my dough is a little soft at this point, so it's just sticking a little bit. So you can see I already have 6, and I'm trying to get 12 out of this. If my dough were a little bit cooler, it wouldn't be sticking like that. Again, if I don't like the way it looks, I'm just going to sculpt it the way I like it. I actually have a little piece of dough there too that jumped up at me. Okay, so this is our first. I'm going to fill this one, even though that'll be for the cook. It's still good, even though it doesn't look pretty. That's our first piece of dough, and I can just clean this off. Either reuse it, or I can just move it off to the side, and I'm going to do this one more. I'm going to see if I can do a better job of rolling this one out. Again, I'm going to flour my marble. Flour my pin. Roll from the center out. You can leave it a little bit thicker, and then it won't be so difficult to handle. Again, this dough, even though it's so rich, it's very forgiving. So you can pick it up, you can flip it around. I think we're good here. Okay, so now I'm going to do my 3 tablespoons of filling. Okay, move this around. I'm going to cut this into quadrants. Each quadrant into 3. Doing a little better this time. And then if you need to add a little bit more filling, you can do that. And then each wedge will be rolled up. So out of these 2 discs, we're going to get 2 dozen or 24 cookies. Bend it into a crescent. Again, you shape it the way you want to. You will be in charge of the dough. That one's sticking, so I'll just use my knife to bring it up. If there's a little stray piece of dough, you can tuck it in. We're almost there with our 2 dozen cookies. It's very forgiving. When it bakes, it's all going to come together beautifully. I'm going to use a prep pan because I still have to glaze and sugar these pastries. And if I put that in the oven with all that sugar and glaze on it, it would burn and it would be a big mess. So we're going to glaze them on our prep pan. And then move them over to a cookie sheet which is lined with either parchment paper or a silicone pad, silicone liner. Here's a tiny one for the cook. Okay, we've completed 2. Now, if you have your dough in the freezer, you can, and you don't feel like making any more than 2 dozen, you can just bake off 2 dozen and do the other 4 dozen at another time. So now we have our 2 dozen rugelach, and I'm going to make a glaze, and we're going to use our cinnamon sugar. So I have the reserved egg white, and we'll just break up the albumin with the whisk. You want to sort of do this until it foams up a bit. Otherwise it kind of hangs together and you don't want that. Okay, so when you see the foam, that'll be your glaze. And I have a little, you can use a pastry brush. This happens to be a silicone pastry brush, which is very easy to use. And I have my cinnamon sugar. So this is my prep pan. I don't care how messy I get. I'm just going to glaze these generously. This is going to give shine, and it's going to let the cinnamon sugar adhere to it. Definitely wouldn't want to put that prep pan in the oven because it would burn and make a big mess. These little silicone pastry brushes are nice. Okay, so we glaze that. And now generously, with our sugar shaker, top each one. And we're almost there. We're almost ready to put these in the oven. Okay, we're all done. Now I'm going to transfer this to a cookie sheet. You either want to line your cookie sheet with parchment paper, or this is a silicone mat, which is very nice. And I'm just going to transfer these now. They don't really expand or spread very much, so don't worry about putting them close together. It's not like a cookie there's no leavening, there's no baking powder, baking soda in this recipe, so they're not going to spread out the way a cookie would, so you don't have to worry about it. And then we're going to bake these off for 18 minutes in a 350-degree oven. And you will have some happy people after they're done. Okay. And now we have completed our rugelach, and we're going to put them in the oven at 350 degrees, and in 18 minutes we'll have fresh baked rugelach. And our rugelach are done, so let's go over to the oven. And now we have 2 dozen home-baked rugelach, and they smell as good as they taste. And I hope that you will enjoy trying this recipe from my book, A Jewish Calendar of Festive Foods, which is available on my website, www.jewishfestivefoods.com. There are many other recipes that I hope you'll try. Thank you very much, and please enjoy these festive foods.